Hey everybody, this is Stormworks, and this is a submarine. I don't see very many submarines on the workshop, so I'm going to teach you how to make them, because I figure maybe people don't know how to make them, and that's why there aren't very many. First things first, you don't want to have very much buoyancy. The only thing above the waterline is the entrance hatch. Second thing second, you're going to want to make sure that your weight is pretty much balanced on the center line of your ship, and then your engines are also going to be balanced on the center line of your ship. If you've got engines that aren't braced against your center of mass, then you're going to end up very, very wobbly. You don't need to have vectored engines or anything like that. Some control vectors are easy enough. For your front control vector, just hit U when you're installing it. That will mirror it across the vertical axis, and that will give you an easy peasy, exact opposite set of motions. And I've got left-right turning on both the top and the bottom. That's pretty basic. You can have whatever you want for your entrance hatch. I'm using this cute little trick where you have a distance meter and it can detect you, and then it folds down one thing and folds up another thing, but that's just totally me being cute. You don't have to do that. You can just use any old hatch you like. Now, when it comes to moving your ship, batteries are your best friend, but the problem is that batteries run out real quick. So, you're going to want to have diesel. And you might be thinking, diesel in a submarine? Yeah, if you can't use diesel, you're gonna end up with a rough time ahead of you, because you can't go very far unless you have diesel. So I've got tons of diesel here in the back. Here's my diesel engines. In fact, this one little unit here is my entire electric motor system. These diesels are far more important. And part of that is just the fact that the electric motors are so much more powerful per square inch. In the back, I've got some rechargers so that when I use up my battery, I can recharge them. You're going to want a bilge system. I've got a bilge in the very back here. You can just see it. And I've also got something that shunts from the front to the back. And that way, once I get water inside, it just activates the bilge and I'm fine. You're going to get water in your submarine. So, do that. Make that. It's a fairly straightforward thing to do. One of the issues you're going to have with using diesel in your submarine is that you're going to get water in your air tanks. This is a very common situation in boats as well. If you've ever had a situation where your boat stops behaving and you're like, why did the engines just shut off? Well, you probably got water in your air intake. An easy way to avoid that is to have an exhaust pipe. So I've got a filter down here which says only air gets past. And then I've got an exhaust here which lets everything else out. So basically what happens is I pull things in from up top, and then I have a filter which forces only air through, and so if water gets in, it just goes out the back. The critical part here is there's no extra pipe between the filter and the exhaust, because if there's extra pipe, then random pockets of air or water can get stuck in that pipe. So you need to have your filter and your exhaust for whatever else you're not taking in right next to each other. And that's all there is to that. So that's going to work fine. Obviously, it won't suck in any air when we're underwater, but once we resurface, we won't have water in the pipe, so we'll be able to get air again right away. So the other trick of this particular ship, and the reason it's called the Lungfish, is that we actually store a lot of air. These green tanks fill up with air. You can see how we've got a fair amount. Not a lot. We're about a third full at this point. And the pink tanks actually store exhaust, because when you get real deep, even exhaust doesn't manage to escape. This means that we have a lot of air and exhaust that's usable when we're underwater. And I'm going to go ahead and show you that now that we're far enough away. When you're maneuvering with this kind of ship, very small touches. You don't need to do very strong dives at all. If you're going vertical, you're going to break something, and these things are surprisingly fragile when you slam nose first into something, especially if you're cruising along at 20 kph like we are. So you can see that we're underwater and we're still doing fine. We got diesel fumes. I don't know if you can see that on Twitter or YouTube, but we've got diesel fumes coming out the top, and we're just using our stored air, and we're continuing on with diesel. Not only does this not cost us any battery, but we're actively recharging the battery as we do this. It's a very straightforward approach. It works great. You'd be shocked at how long you can last underwater with stored air in your diesel. Let's not hit that rock. And once you run out, you can just switch over to battery, either automatically or manually, as you prefer. It's very, very straightforward. And then when you surface and you've got air again, you can immediately turn the diesel back on and start powering up your battery again. It's just very, very basic idea here, but it's something that gives your ship a lot more durability than it would have if you were forced to use battery anytime you were underwater, just because battery doesn't last very long at all. Now, we could wait for the batteries to kick in, but we're actually going to last quite a while. We've got probably 3 more minutes of air in our tanks, and we were only a third full. I'm not going to do that. I don't really feel like making you wait that long, so you're just going to have to take my word that it does switch back over to batteries once it runs out. Right now we do not have any exhaust because we're too low, but once we get high enough, you can see how the exhaust came popping out. Woohoo! Now that 0 that you see popping on and off, that is me notifying myself that I am at the surface, just so that when I'm in third-person view like this, I know when I am actually at the surface, because it can be hard at night to tell. Let's take you on a tour of how the ship is actually built. The front of the ship is where I put the helm, obviously. You have to be very careful when you put the helm this close to the front of the ship, because if you hit something, your helm will get damaged and you won't be able to control the ship anymore. It's generally a lot safer if you have it a little bit further back, but it's a small ship, so what are you going to do? I put the batteries up front because they weigh quite a bit, and I wanted to balance the front and the back relatively well, so the batteries offset the engines rather nicely. Behind that, I've got this mess of tanks, which we'll get to later. In the very back of the ship, I have the engines and all of that piping that puts them together with the various battery rechargers and that sort of stuff. It's very, very basic setup. I always put buttons here that do all of the things that we want to do, and then connect them up with the controls later on so that I can do it manually if I need to. The orange fuel tanks, I always color code everything. The orange fuel tanks here are 2 sets deep. It's not 6 on each side, it's 12 on each side, and we have plenty of fuel left. So there's no concern there. They just go in. I use a single small pump, which you can just barely see, because I find that if you use a single small pump, that's enough for these large tanks, for these large engines. If you're using smaller engines, you might not need the fuel pump. These tanks here are for storing air and exhaust. And right now we've got plenty of air and we're losing exhaust. There are more efficient ways to set this up, but unfortunately I ran out of space in this little ship, so we're a little bit cramped for space. Basically we've got 4 green tanks here, and then 2 green tanks and 2 pink tanks, and the same on the other side. And all I do is I pull in the air from above, and I run it through these large heavy pumps, or you can do a string of smaller pumps. And I run it into the tanks, run it past the tanks, and back into the engines. And this green pipe just runs across everything that we're going to need. So you don't need to worry too much about whether or not you're piping into tanks or into the engine. That will sort itself out as long as you don't have any pockets of water in there. The exhaust is the same thing, but the other direction. So we pull it out, run it all the way back, and then we have a miscolored set of green pipes there. And we've got a pump running the other direction, or again, you can use a string of smaller pumps. But there is a little bit of a fork here where it comes down and runs into these pink tanks. That way, if we're so low in the water that we can no longer have exhaust coming out of our exhaust pipes, we can just store it in the tank, and that'll give us another 2 or 3 minutes worth of diesel. So those are my secrets to creating good good ships. This is a fully functional setup. You can do basically any sort of exploration you'd want with this thing. Only problems with this ship are that it doesn't have a very good turning radius, and it also doesn't have any flotation elements to help you get back to the surface or sink. You've got to do everything with very close to neutral buoyancy. But those things are manageable, and you can always design a more advanced ship that has better capabilities once you know what you're doing with this ship. You know, you don't want to start with the hard stuff. I'm going to build a larger ship later on that has a floater that's connected to pipes, so that when I get down this low, I can still continue to drop exhaust, because right now I'm no longer dropping exhaust and it builds up pretty quick. But that's all just details. It's all just like cute little toys that you can do. You can put in GPS and all that stuff, whatever you would like. Once you have the basic ideas in mind, it's pretty easy to build whatever you need. It's not nearly as complicated as it feels when you're approaching it, you know, without any sort of idea as to what you're going to want. I'm going to go ahead and put this ship up in the workshop if you wanted to see it. But there's really nothing too special about it. It's just exactly as I've described it. Woohoo! You want to see what happens when we crash it? Because it crashes bad, as I explained earlier. Crash! And now I have lost control. Because I was too close. The helm got caught up in the hit. And this is why you generally don't have your helm so close to the front of the ship. Exciting.